So Mark asked me to speak on the topic of CEO transgressions. And this is because I've spent a good deal of my trust research career studying trust violations and repair. I'm going to talk about this topic in general, and I will also talk about a recent study that I have as well, keeping a close eye on the time. I'm going to keep a lot of the discussion high level, and if you find any particular points interesting, then we can cover it in the Q&A. I think, you know, as all of you are surely customers of the business press, you're familiar with the fact that CEO transgressions are all too common. So this has been going on for decades, and these types of transgressions are really what inspired my colleagues and I to start studying trust violation and repair back in the year 2000, which was, gosh, 20 years ago now. And what I'm going to talk about is this stream of research that I conducted with my colleagues, Peter Kim, Kurt Dirks, and Don Farron. So along the time that the four of us began conducting trust repair research, some other folks did as well. And I'd like to highlight some of the main ideas that came out of the stream of research, or that have come out of the stream of research so far. So first of all, the initial research on trust violations and repair began by studying verbal responses, things like apologies and denials, reticence. So reticence is when you say, no comment in response to an accusation, you're not kind of claiming guilt or innocence. Or promises of future trustworthy behavior. So these verbal responses are considered to be kind of low cost responses that transgressors can offer to try to repair trust. Now, instead of, or in addition to verbal responses, you can also choose to offer a substantive response, such as penance. And one common type of penance might be to give up money that you shouldn't have taken, and maybe some money on top of that. That would be an example of penance. And so it's taking on a personal cost. Other examples of behaviors might be just trying to exhibit future trustworthy behavior to get somebody else, to get the trustor to trust you again. Now, generally speaking, the best trust repair strategies are those that address both the past, like, so what happened with the transgression, and try to kind of offer some signal of remorse, but also the future, because when people are trying to trust again, they want to see not that you've addressed the past and showed some remorse, but also that you're not going to transgress again. Okay, so we need to have like a past-oriented response and a future-oriented response. One of the other key findings that came out of this conversation is that the type of trust violation matters for how easy or difficult it is to repair. So if we think about trust or people judging others' trustworthiness according to this common framework of ability, benevolence, and integrity, the two dimensions that were really examined are ability and integrity. And what we find is that if it's kind of a more competence related or ability related trust violation, that it's a lot easier to trust that person again after an expression of remorse. However, if it's related to integrity, so if somebody was lying or cheating or stealing, it's really, really difficult to repair trust, because any lapse of integrity is seen as being very diagnostic of a person's true character. So if they've been lying or cheating once, then people just think, well, they're just gonna look for another opportunity to lie or cheat again, and that they're likely to do these things again, because that's just the type of person that they are. Okay, and so existing trust repair research kind of in sum had focused on how to repair trust in that individual transgressor, and it had also focused on responses that individual would initiate. And so if I was caught stealing or lying, if I'm, offering an apology or giving the money back, it's that type of dynamic. All right. But if we're thinking about organizations and we're thinking about CEO transgressions, it's not just about repairing trust in the CEO. The CEO is the figurehead of their organization. And so because of that, people see the CEO and their characteristics and their values and those of the organization as being inextricably intertwined. And hence, if you're going to also need to repair trust in the organization, you need to consider these are two entities, they're related, and sometimes you're going to need to focus on repairing trust just in the organization, or maybe there's circumstances where you need to keep this errant CEO around. And so then you need to repair trust in both the errant CEO and the organization. And so one example from the earlier slide of transgressions, just to clarify this, is, let's think of Martha Stewart. She's, the houseware guru here in the US, and she was thrown in jail for insider stock trading. Now, Martha Stewart living omnimedia is nothing without Martha Stewart. So that's one good example of a situation where the organization had to also repair trust in the CEO. And it's also common if the errant CEO was a firm founder. These are situations where you would have to repair trust in both. Okay. And so a recent study that was published in Journal of Trust Research in 2018 looked at, kind of thought about the fact that if it's an organization, there are people other than the CEO who can also repair trust, such as the board of directors, right? And so a third party, such as the board of directors, could initiate these trust repair efforts. Another thing to think about is that the organization has the option in some cases to remove the CEO, right? And in doing so, they could signal that the problem is solved. Okay. And so our focus is on looking at these CEO transgressions and looking at two different transgressions, two different responses to these transgressions that I'll talk about, and whether or not they repair trust in the CEO and or the organization. We conducted this study using an experimental task. I'm not going to go into too much detail given lack of time. Okay, so the first response that we studied was CEO dismissal. Now, there's a large literature in strategy about CEO dismissal and the circumstances that might lead to a CEO being dismissed. Okay. But that literature really falls short of examining, well, what happens after the CEO is dismissed. And so, we're looking at whether or not CEO dismissal actually affects trust or repairs trust in the associated organization. Okay. And our idea here, just quickly, so if you look at the top part, we expected that CEO dismissal would repair trust in the organization by signaling, and this comes from social psychology, disintegrativity, which is a mouthful. But what that simply means is that you can have a group of people, but how group-like do they seem? Do they seem like a tight-knit group, or do they seem like a loose collection of individuals? And the idea is that if you remove the CEO, you're signaling that that bad apple was removed from the bunch. And because of that, it should repair trust in the organization. Now, also because of that dynamic, that if you remove that errant CEO, it should decrease trust in the CEO. Now, interestingly, we didn't exactly find that. We found that if you dismiss the CEO, that it does increase trust in the organization as expected, but it also improved trust in that errant CEO. I guess that when people saw that the CEO was being punished, they did think that, he or she would be a reformed sinner. Okay. The second option, and I have very limited time, so I'm just going to talk through this and then go to the end. The second response, the second board of directors initiated response that we looked at was, well, what happens if the board of directors forces or asks the CEO to apologize and offer an act of penance, such as giving back the money and also taking some personal cost? Okay. And we expected that this response should repair trust in both the organization and the CEO. But what would happen is if the CEO apologizes and offers some act of penance, then it should signal that they've repented, that they're a reformed sinner. And by repentance, we mean that it signals things like they've taken responsibility, they show remorse, they regret what they've done, and this will increase trust in the CEO. And because that's connected to trust in the organization, that should then increase trust in the organization. We found, as we expected, that if the CEO was forced to apologize and offer this act of penance, that it did increase trust in both the CEO and the organization. However, and I'm sorry, I just noticed that the bottom graph has a slight error in it. The effect on trust in the organization was direct from apology and penance. And so I believe that it signals that, since the board of directors has acted, it says to perceivers, to trustors, that there are other good people in the organization and that we may not be able to trust that CEO, but we can trust the organization. Okay, so let me get down to the practical implications. And so some of the takeaways are, if you do have a CEO who's guilty of a transgression, it doesn't have to be that CEO who initiates the repair efforts. If they're not willing to, the board of directors can step in. In times of crisis, the board of directors might need to step in. But the findings also offer some hope to these errant CEOs, because even if they're fired, we find that that did seem to increase trust in them for some reason, maybe because they paid a personal cost. Finally, however, we would hope, maybe unrealistically so, but we would hope that we would see fewer of these CEO transgressions. And, maybe it would be interesting to research what's causing, these transgressions to continue. Okay. Oh, and then if you want to know more about this, there are video resources from Northwestern University. You can Google the Trust Project, Northwestern University, to find some video resources. Thank you.